Paris, in the winter of 1840. In a courtroom crowded with wary gazes, a young woman dressed in a simple black gown quietly stepped onto the witness stand. Her name was Marie Lafarge. Outside, the crowd pressed together just to catch a glimpse of the face that had become the symbol of a case dividing all of France. Born into a family that longed for status but had never touched true wealth, Marie grew up believing that marriage could open the door to prestige. Yet when the carriage stopped in front of the cold brick house in Limousin, she realized that dream had turned into a scene of decay. All the promises of fortune had become nothing more than mounting debts. A few months later, her husband, Charles Lafarge, fell ill after eating the sweet cake sent by Marie's own hand. People said he died of cholera. But then, when a servant claimed she had seen Marie dissolving white powder into his glass, and when the body was exhumed, everything began to turn into an accusation. This trial became a tense confrontation between personal belief and the emerging authority of scientific evidence. For the first time, a new testing method, the Marsh test, was used to confirm the presence of arsenic in the victim's stomach. Yet even that result could not silence the debate. Was Marie a cold-blooded murderer or a victim of prejudice and poisonous rumors? If you had been in that room, amid the January chill and the eyes of hundreds watching, what would you have decided? That the truth had been laid bare, or that this was only a trial staged to punish a woman who dared to defy her fate? Marie Capel grew up in Paris during the early years of the 19th century. The dazzling aura of the upper classes always shimmered in the mind of this ambitious young woman. Her family was merely comfortable, never able to rival the great noble houses. Her father was an artillery officer. He died in a hunting accident when Marie was only 12 years old. Her mother remarried, but she also passed away not long after. Losing both parents at such a young age put an end to any hope of a prosperous life. With no one willing to take her in, Marie moved to live with her aunt. The woman was married to an official of the Bank of France. From a middle-class household, Marie stepped into a world where honor and social standing were valued above happiness itself. Though she lived in an environment that seemed elegant, she was constantly haunted by her status as the poor relative. That shadow clung to her, driving her to long for an escape. Marie grew up in an atmosphere where every dinner was filled with stories of successful marriages and alliances between powerful families. She watched her friends one by one marry older but wealthy gentlemen, and she, past her early 20s, had yet to receive any notable proposal. To her, the dowry of 90,000 francs was the only chance to leave, behind the precarious position of a niece living on the goodwill of her relatives. In her mind, marriage was a golden ticket to rise above the years of humiliation. It could conceal the poverty etched into her childhood. A respectable marriage to a wealthy man was the dream in which Marie placed all her hopes. It might rewrite the story of her life. In 1839, at the age of 23, Marie stood at a decisive crossroads. Through a matchmaking agency, she was introduced to Charles Pouch Lafarge, a 28-year-old man. He claimed to own an estate worth hundreds of thousands of francs, with a steady income from an iron foundry in the Corrèze region. The agent's description painted a splendid picture. Besides his wealth, Charles was said to be a respectable and gentle man. It seemed like a rare opportunity for a young woman like Marie, who had no significant dowry. To Marie, Charles was the key that could open the door to respect and social standing. She believed this was her last chance to escape the shadow of her past and to become a true lady of society. Without hesitation, she accepted the proposal. Carrying her dreams of a new life, she hoped she would be admired and loved. On the road leaving Paris, Marie, told herself that every sacrifice would eventually be rewarded. Inside, she wrestled with both excitement and a vague unease, but she kept assuring herself that everything would turn out well. When she arrived at Charles's house in Limousin, Marie was overwhelmed by its imposing appearance from a distance. The building had the look of a noble estate. Though somewhat dilapidated, it seemed to confirm all the promises of wealth. The first days of marriage passed in calm contentment. With a mixture of innocence and pride, Marie immediately began writing letters to her friends. She boasted to everyone about her new life, about her successful husband, and about the grand house. She truly believed she had found happiness, that her childhood dreams had finally come true. But behind the elegant facade, cracks soon began to show. The house turned out to be a decaying former monastery. Plaster was peeling, windows were split with deep cracks, and the damp smell rose from dark hallways. Charles was not the wealthy gentleman she had imagined, but a man already drowning in financial trouble. He even confessed that most of her dowry would be used to pay off mounting debts. The harsh truth gradually became clear, shattering the illusions Marie had once held. Her hopes for a life of respectability turned into a bitter disappointment, driving her into a spiral of resentment and disillusionment. Even as she realized this painful truth, Marie knew she could do nothing else. The shame of divorce, the whispers that would spread through Paris, and her own precarious status left her with no choice but to stay. If you had stood at the same crossroads as Marie, would you have chosen those promises or stepped away? The cracks in the house grew more evident over time. Marie's mother-in-law and sister-in-law greeted her with eyes full of suspicion. Instead of welcoming arms, they spoke to her in words as sharp as knives. With no friends or family around, Marie felt alone among strangers. The dark hallways and the sound of wind whistling through the gaps in the walls made her shiver. Her mother-in-law watched her every move with constant wariness. In her eyes, Marie was an intruder, not a daughter-in-law. Even so, Marie clung to fragile hopes. In her lonely moments, she whispered to herself, "Things will get better." Though they were sinking in debt, she believed Charles might still revive the ironworks. She tried to trust that this marriage could still save her dream of a respectable life. Those thoughts were the small flame that kept her from collapsing entirely, though it was faint. But reality was far more merciless. Charles was not the hero she had once imagined. He was merely an ordinary man, powerless. The rare conversations they shared often revolved around debts. Charles promised to repay every loan, but she was not sure he truly believed that himself. Marie's optimism only made her own helplessness stand out against a future growing darker by the day. More oppressive than anything was the fear of being scorned. At times, Marie thought of returning to Paris, but to do so as a failed wife meant admitting she had been deceived. The honor of her family and her own pride, the things she had staked everything upon, had become chains binding her in place. She was trapped not only in that decaying house and among strangers, but also inside her own pride. To hide the truth, Marie worked desperately to keep up appearances. She wrote letters to friends in Paris describing a happy life. Every line was a small lie to protect a pride already cracking apart. She cleaned the parlor herself, decorated the shabby corners of the house. She tried to make Le Glandier worthy of the image of a dignified lady. But those efforts were only like powder over a face that had long been exhausted. Each strained smile, each polite gesture was a battle to preserve the last scraps of her dignity. But even these efforts could not stop the watchful eyes that had begun to cling to her. On long nights, as the wind swept through the stone corridors, Marie wondered how long her endurance could last. In December 1839, Charles decided to travel to Paris to settle his affairs. He hoped he might secure additional funds to rescue the ironworks that stood on the brink of bankruptcy. Marie remained at Le Glandier, managing the household herself. In her letters to her husband, she wrote in an optimistic tone, assuring him that everything was fine. To encourage him, she enclosed a small box of pastries, calling it a belated Christmas gift. But when Charles returned after several weeks away, his health quickly declined. At first, he merely complained of strange stomach pains. A few days later, the pains became intense and frequent, leaving him exhausted. Sweat streamed down his pale face. The family and servants believed it was simply an ordinary illness, perhaps cholera, since the disease was spreading across Europe at that time. Yet, as Charles grew weaker, a vague unease began to settle over the house. The local doctor diagnosed a digestive ailment, possibly caused by poor food during the long journey. His groans echoed through the cold hallways, filling everyone with worry. Why would a healthy man deteriorate so swiftly? In the midst of the crisis, Marie cared for her husband with unusual devotion. She prepared soup herself and brought meals to Charles's bedside. But those seemingly tender acts began to stir suspicion. One servant, while cleaning, glimpsed Marie stirring some kind of white powder into her husband's glass. She could not be certain what it was, but the image lodged itself in her mind. Meanwhile, Marie continued writing letters to her husband's relatives. With a reassuring tone, she insisted Charles was only mildly ill and would soon recover. Those letters, written in her elegant hand, clashed sharply with the reality. Charles was drawing ever closer to death. Marie's behavior was a combination of outward diligence and a calm that seemed almost unnatural. It began to create an invisible line separating her from everyone around her. Whispers started to weave through the house. Marie's mother-in-law, who had always been distant, now watched her with growing wariness. The servants murmured among themselves in corners of the kitchen, recounting how Marie would quietly leave the sick room. Her face remained cold, showing no trace of panic or sorrow. Suspicion spread, from furtive glances to questions left hanging in the air. Her mother-in-law began to note every detail: how Marie prepared the food, how she kept a small box hidden in her private room. Even those who had once been neutral no longer fully trusted her. The atmosphere in Le Glandier grew stifling. Marie was now surrounded by watchful eyes and the constant murmur of doubt. Charles's decline had sown the seeds of a storm of suspicion. It pulled Marie into the center of a truth in which she herself was the central figure. In a house suffocating with wary gazes, what could ever truly be clear? The death of Charles Lafarge on January 14, 1840, at Le Glandier shook the cold house in Limousin to its core. The suspicions surrounding Marie Capel quickly turned into a tense investigation. One question lingered: had Charles died of natural illness, or had his wife's hand been involved? The inquiry began immediately after Charles passed away, driven by the determination of Madame Lafarge. With the sharp intuition of a mother, she refused to believe her son's death was natural. Madame Lafarge demanded that the body be exhumed, a rare decision at that time, since autopsies were still regarded as a violation of the dead. The authorities agreed after deliberation. On a cold morning, the investigative team and local doctors proceeded to unearth Charles's body from the cemetery near Le Glandier. The exhumation was carried out under strict supervision. Charles's remains were taken to a makeshift examination room in Toul. Though lacking experience in toxicological analysis, the doctors began the dissection with great care. His organs were removed and placed on the examination table under the dim glow of oil lamps. They searched for traces of arsenic, a poison common in that era. It was often used to kill rats, but could easily become a weapon for murder. But the result was negative. The finding caused controversy due to the limited skill of the local doctors and doubts about the reliability of the method they employed. Suspicion toward Marie diminished significantly after the initial examination. To reinforce their case, investigators turned to inspecting items in the house. A malachite box was discovered in Marie's room containing arsenic, though she insisted it was rat poison. A cake that Marie had sent to Charles during his trip to Paris was also tested, and arsenic was detected there. The contradictions between the test results led to fierce debate. The local doctors were criticized for their lack of experience, and some argued that the test could have been flawed due to impure chemicals. The renowned toxicologist Mathieu Orfila was summoned from Paris to review the case. With his superior expertise, Orfila proceeded to conduct the Marsh test. This method, newly developed by James Marsh in 1836, allowed arsenic to be detected with considerable accuracy. He dissolved tissue samples in a solution, heated them, and observed. A silvery metallic film appeared, a sign consistent with arsenic. The results were declared. Arsenic was present in Charles's body in quantities sufficient to cause death. However, the chemist François Vincent Raspail supported Marie's defense. He argued that the amount of arsenic was too small and could have come from environmental contamination or mistakes in the testing process. Meanwhile, Marie maintained a remarkably calm demeanor, answering questions with sharp composure. Witnesses, from servants to her mother-in-law, provided testimony about her suspicious behavior. The white powder stirred into a cup, the reassuring letters that contradicted the reality. Each piece of evidence, from the corpse to the malachite box, was assembled to form the picture of a calculating wife. Although the test results showed clear contradictions, the accumulation of troubling details led the authorities to issue an order for Marie Lafarge's provisional arrest. Marie rose, adjusted her dress, and followed the policeman down the cold corridor. Newspapers in the Limoges region quickly printed bold headlines, calling her the double-faced wife. Every wall of Le Glandier became the backdrop for a story that all of France would soon be discussing. The investigation, with its combination of emerging science and old-fashioned suspicion, had turned the Lafarge case into a battle between truth and falsehood. But while the inquiry into the arsenic had yet to reach its conclusion, another unexpected accusation surfaced. From Paris, a noble woman, the Marquise de Léotot, sent a letter alleging that Marie had once stolen a box of diamonds while staying at her residence. The Marquise recounted in her letter. In the summer of 1839, before marrying Charles Lafarge, Marie Capel visited the chateau of the Marquise de Léotot, a former schoolmate. During her stay, a valuable set of diamond jewelry belonging to the Marquise disappeared. At first, Marie was suspected, but the Viscount considered the idea too implausible, and the matter was set aside. On February 10th, 1840, during a search of Marie's house, the police discovered the diamonds hidden in a box. Marie claimed she had been entrusted with the jewels to handle a blackmail situation, but the court in Brive did not believe her. In July 1840, she was sentenced to 2 years in prison for theft, a conviction that stained her reputation before the murder trial even began. Was this a cruel chain of coincidences or a cunning scheme concealed behind an impassive face? In September 1840, the trial of Marie Lafarge began. Crowds of the public, journalists, and the merely curious pressed together. The case quickly turned into a public tragedy. Marie, dressed in a simple black gown, entered with a composure that seemed almost cold. Her sharp eyes swept across the room. Her face, though pale, showed no trace of panic. The air was stifling, filled with the smell of sweat and the murmur of whispers. Every gaze was fixed on the young woman accused of poisoning her husband. This was not merely a trial. It was an arena where justice confronted mystery. At the heart of the proceedings lay an intense scientific debate, like a battle between truth and doubt. The prosecutor, in a firm voice, presented the evidence. The Marsh test, conducted by the renowned toxicologist Mathieu Orfila, had detected arsenic in the body of Charles Lafarge. The exhibits were introduced: a malachite box containing arsenic found in Marie's room, and the cake she had sent to Charles before he fell ill, became deadly pieces of a puzzle. But the defense attorneys, equally sharp, countered vigorously. They questioned the purity of the chemicals used in the Marsh test. They argued that the arsenic might have come from the environment, soil, water, or errors in the laboratory. They called the accusation speculative, insufficient to condemn a human life. This controversy turned the courtroom into a battlefield of emerging science, where old certainties about guilt collided with fledgling forensic methods. The testimony of witnesses only made the case more tangled. A servant recalled seeing Marie stir a white powder into Charles's cup. Her eyes were filled with suspicion as she recounted the memory. Madame Lafarge, the mother-in-law, described Marie's coldness. Even as Charles writhed in his final hours, she showed no sign of sorrow. However, a few other witnesses claimed that Marie was devoted, always by her husband's bedside, cooking and caring for him. The testimonies contradicted each other. They were like shards of broken glass, impossible to piece together into a clear truth. Public opinion in the courtroom wavered. No one could say for certain whether Marie was a monster or simply a victim of prejudice. Marie maintained an uncanny calm even in the eye of the storm. She answered questions with confidence, sometimes so sharp it left the prosecutor unsettled. The French press devoured every detail. They turned her into the emblem of a poisoning case, calling her the Black Widow or the Queen of Arsenic. Public sentiment was bitterly divided. Some despised her, seeing her as the embodiment of evil. Others felt sympathy, convinced that a young woman like her could not be a murderer. Outside the courtroom, the atmosphere was feverish. Articles and public debates inflamed every corner of Toul. After many days of arguments, the court declared Marie guilty. The initial sentence was death, but under pressure from public opinion and intervention from her supporters, the punishment was reduced to life imprisonment with hard labor. As she heard the verdict, Marie bowed her head, but still raised her voice to proclaim her innocence. Her words echoed through the harsh silence of the courtroom. Justice had prevailed, but the truth remained a shadow. The story of Marie Lafarge would forever be a mystery with no clear answer. Would you trust the scientific evidence or believe that all the accusations were merely a series of cruel coincidences? The case was a mirror reflecting the profound contradictions within society. In it, greed, honor, and truth collided in a whirlpool with no escape. From a moral perspective, the case posed a harsh question: what drives a person to the brink of crime? Marie had wagered her life on a marriage that seemed like an escape. But when the dream collapsed amid the decaying house at Le Glandier, she was isolated by a cold mother-in-law and mounting debts. Was she truly cornered with no way out? From a social standpoint, the Lafarge affair marked a turning point in how the public engaged with crime. It was one of the first cases to be reported daily in the press, transforming the courtroom into a public stage. Public opinion was fiercely divided. Some denounced Marie as the embodiment of evil, while others defended her as a misunderstood woman. Psychologically, the case revealed the complexity of human nature when confronted with failure. Marie, with her almost chilling composure during the trial, became the image of a soul torn between pride and despair. She wrote letters boasting of a fictitious happy life, tended to Charles with a suspicious devotion, and proclaimed her innocence even as the sentence was pronounced. Was this the calculation of a criminal mind, or the final attempt to protect her dignity before a world eager to pass judgment? Marie's psychology, an unsettling combination of sharp intelligence and the pain of a dream betrayed, made her a character impossible to judge simply. What happens when hope turns into resentment, when someone is driven into the cul-de-sac of their own existence? Beyond the questions surrounding Marie, this was also the case that ushered in a new era in forensic history. It laid the groundwork for a time when science would become a sharp blade in the quest for truth. The Marsh test, invented by James Marsh in 1836, was applied publicly for the first time in the Lafarge trial, turning the courtroom into an unwilling laboratory. It created an unprecedented precedent. Scientific evidence could outweigh witness testimony in determining guilt. The moment the renowned toxicologist Orfila stood before the court, calmly explaining each step of his analysis, it was as if science itself had pronounced the verdict instead of the judge. The Lafarge case became a milestone that encouraged investigators across Europe, from London to Vienna, to adopt this method. More than a century later, the name Marie Lafarge still appears in forensic textbooks as a symbol of the moment science first inserted itself into moral judgment. But it also raised new ethical questions. When science and emotion are intertwined, who truly decides the fate of a human being?